Story 1. We used to leave the house with no way to contact anyone and just hoped for the best. Now people panic if someone doesn't reply within 5 minutes. It's incredible how quickly normal has changed. Story 2. We used to drive to work, hear a cool song on the radio and think, I hope the DJ announces the song and artist at the end. If they didn't, you had to wait and hope to hear it again soon. Story 3. It never stopped being crazy. If you want to know something about the internet, turn it off. If you want to check on someone, call them or visit their home. If you're hungry, walk, bike or drive. Want the news? Watch cable television at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. The real difference is instant gratification. People have become addicted to always having immediate access to everything and the ease of obtaining things. The consequences of a person's actions feel guilt-free because they are directed at a screen rather than in front of another person. Without face-to-face human connections, people have lost what I call living life. I would prefer living in the 1990s and even up to the mid-2000s over today. Story 4. I used to answer the phone whenever it rang. Screening calls didn't exist until I was in my 20s. I'm still kind of old school. I use my phone, but it's not always attached to me, and it's usually on silent. People get upset when they assume my phone is for them and not just for me. Story 5. I remember holding my mom's hand and walking our dog to the video rental store every Friday so we could have pizza and family movie night. It is still one of my fondest memories. Story 6. People in the past had more knowledge but were less confident. People today have less knowledge but behave as if they know everything. Story 7. It is surprising how we went from meeting by the tree after school to needing read receipts and GPS just to feel secure. Story 8. I disliked landlines and never used them. No one ever contacted me. Now I have a smartphone, but no one calls or texts me. Story 9. You mean cell phones? I don't think the craziness of the world right now has much to do with cell phones. However, the internet may contribute. Story 10. We used to know our friends' and colleagues' phone numbers by heart. Calling was something special. You were only reachable at home or the office. You would have to find a telephone booth to call from the street. It makes me wonder where Superman changes nowadays. Story 11. Can we assume you mean mobile phones? I was alive long before mobile phones, but even at my age, we had telephones. Story 12. Life without phones was better, no question. If someone couldn't reach you, you had a valid excuse. Sorry, I was out of the house. You could screen calls, and texting wasn't really a thing yet. We just had answering machines. Everyone got the news from regular, nightly television or newspapers. If you wanted beauty or makeup tips, you'd pick up a magazine like 17 or Teen Vogue. Shopping and social events were infinitely better. Story 13. Without cell phones, people were more connected. As crazy as that sounds, I miss the days of just hanging out with a group of friends without anyone being distracted by their phones. I often look around at a function and it's kind of sad. Story 14. You are asking generations older than baby boomers. I hope some of them use Reddit and saw your post. Even boomers like my dad used a cell phone in their 30s. Story 15. I remember not using my mobile phone until after 6 p.m. because it cost money to make calls before then. Having a bicycle as a child was important. Buses were safer as a teenager, just like hanging out downtown. However, kids would still get jumped by others. I witnessed fistfights and BB guns around Polo or Portage Place in the 1990s, but no machetes. Story 16. Being disconnected was just the way life was. Needing to disconnect the way people do now is truly strange, although necessary. Story 17. I love the convenience of accessing all the information in the world at my fingertips, but I am also addicted to shorts, and it is wasting a lot of time. Story 18. It's ridiculous. The excitement of coming home to see your answering machine blinking with messages was something special. Call waiting and three-way calling were the norm. Then there were collect calls from payphones and beepers. But then came the downfall. Blackberries and Nextel changed everything, and suddenly 8-hour workdays became a thing of the past because we are always connected now. Story 19. It is amazing that we can look up any piece of information at any time. It is surprising that all the different phone brands require different charging cables. Story 20. I was out karting when we ran out of money because it became too expensive to be competitive. I tried cheaper sports, but nothing clicked. Eventually, I started going to a billiards hall to smoke and drink during my first and second years of high school. I got tired of that, so I began hanging out at arcades or PC cafes. Story 21. I used to spend about an hour calling friends on their landlines during the weekend to organize our plans. The only problem arose when someone said they were not going, which required me to call everyone again to reorganize. Story 22. People used to come home to watch television. Now they carry it around all day, every day. The media through which information flows is heavily controlled and propagandized. Story 23. I had to remember the house numbers of my friends' homes and the pizza place we always ordered from. If you wanted to meet up with someone, you would pick a spot and time and hope they would be there. Alternatively, you could ride your bike over and hope their parents would let them out to play. Story 24. I remember being in Manhattan and needing to connect with a friend, but we didn't have a specific time or location set in advance. I was near Central Park and he was somewhere south of there. Fortunately, he is 6 feet 7 inches tall, and as I was heading south from Central Park on 5th Avenue, I could see his head sticking above the crowd a few blocks away. We easily met up, no problem. That experience always sticks with me from the time before text messaging. Story 25. When I was 15, I occasionally attended parties. My mom always asked for the address, but there was no way to check it. I had to ask random people on the street for directions, and my mom did not know anything about my whereabouts until I returned home. Access to information was very limited. We often visited a public library to consult encyclopedias for information. Story 26. It's quite astonishing. In the past, you had to ask adults for answers on topics they were not experts in, and they would provide myths, untruths, and wild guesses. This required you to go to the library, examine outdated books in the card catalog, and read to uncover the facts. Today, everyone has access to the latest research and information about various subjects, and scientists worldwide share real-time data. Yet, where do people go for answers? Social media echo chambers filled with conspiracy theories, automated accounts, and psychological warfare from hostile nations. I often express that we are currently experiencing a new dark age. Story 27. Millennials watch their parents and then their children become overwhelmed by unregulated social media influence. Many of us learned what trolling looked like through platforms like 4chan and various random message boards and forums. Flat earthers, neo-Nazis, involuntary celibates, white supremacists, conspiracy theorists, quite the range, with some relatively harmless and others crazy and violent. The ideal strategy was to ignore them, as they thrived on attention. But then we all got caught in the timeline. The engagement algorithm on Facebook allowed trolls to blend in with the rest of society, specifically elevating their posts because not enough people learned to avoid feeding the trolls. Negative content rose to the top while everything real and sincere sank to the bottom. I remember the moment when, if someone posted an unreasonable opinion, it was quickly dismissed and forgotten by the few who encountered it. Now, the algorithm promotes unwanted content and shows it to as many people as possible. Almost every content platform has adopted an engagement algorithm drawn by the compelling revenue from data sales. It seems unavoidable companies cannot resist without risking acquisition. Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. Perhaps all of this was inevitable. Another platform heavily disrupting society. However, previous platforms like television, radio, and the printing press were quickly regulated. The United States is unlikely to do anything at this point. I can only hope that the European Union and Canada wake up soon and regulate engagement algorithms. Upon reflection, it seems like the company leader clicked through a message board and thought, I should apply this to my platform but disguise it as content discovery. Story 28. I loved life before cell phones. People weren't walking around like zombies with their faces buried in their phones. People actually talked to each other. If I wanted to do something with my friends, I would call them on my reliable landline phone and we would make plans. Sometimes we would just chat on the phone. There was no endless scrolling or constant notifications. Social media didn't exist, which was a bonus. Story 29. I am fully convinced that our constantly connected society is the reason for everyone's anxiety levels and mental health issues being in chaos. Story 30. Assuming you mean mobile phones, it was much less stressful, but terrible things were still happening everywhere all the time. Story 31. Any moment of boredom is immediately soothed by a device in hand, regardless of age or walk of life, myself included. If you couldn't reach someone by phone or text, tough luck. You simply didn't. The decline of email further contributed to this. There were significant advantages and disadvantages to not being in constant communication. You could benefit from it in both work and leisure. People took advantage for better or worse. Business was different. The world has gone crazy, largely due to the incessant flow of information and the impact of smartphones on our brains, coupled with the dynamics of social media. I have disliked it since high school. I had Kill Your MySpace t-shirts made, but no one cared. Story 32. The good old days when you would enjoy a pint in the local pub. The phone would ring in the background, you would barely even register it. Then the barmaid would call, "Bridget, Bridget." I would wander over. "Yellow. Hey, are you in the pub?" "Yes, mate." "Cool, I will be there in 10. Click. Good times. Story 33. It was much less hectic and stressful, allowing for a more balanced life between rest and work. Looking up instead of down at a phone made life completely different. People engaged in conversation with one another. Story 34. I miss being able to have someone's full attention and commitment to plans. Nowadays, everyone keeps checking their phones and often has a better option, making them unreliable when it comes to plans. Story 35. It's honestly wild. Back then, if someone wanted to hang out, they would just show up at your door or call your home phone. Now we are glued to screens, always reachable, yet somehow more distant than ever. Story 36. We lived our lives without always being available. When the home phone rang, we often let the answering machine take the call so we could screen it. We made plans, and if someone didn't show up, we had no way of contacting them and just dealt with it. We explored the world, and when we took pictures, it was just one or two because of film. It was a great world, and I wish I didn't have to carry my phone with me all the time. It seems to control everyone's lives, and that is frustrating. Story 37. Life with phones is so normal for me that I struggle to remember not having one. I was born in the early 1980s and spent a lot of time riding my bike, playing backyard baseball, and exploring the outdoors. Now, I'm trying to wean myself off my phone. Story 38. Sometimes I think about it, and it blows my mind that we are here. However, I am also completely unsurprised that we have messed things up so severely. Story 39. Mobile phones? Most people had phones, especially in America and Europe. Having to be home to use the phone? Public phones were not clean. Remember getting tangled in a phone cord? Not just muting your phone when going to the bathroom? Ever have a phone cord that was too short? Phone cord tangles. What exactly is being missed? Missing important calls? Collect calls? Portable phones are simply limited-range mobile phones, and you might overhear conversations you aren't part of. Sweaty ears? No speakerphone? No headset? Having to hang up and redial at the 8th number? Standing during an hour-long phone call because your phone is on the wall? Twirling that tangled cord. The only good thing about old phones was you could pretend they were grappling hooks after they broke. Story 40. That was my childhood. Our parents would set up playdates over the phone after we talked in school. We had a lot to discuss since we weren't constantly updated on each other's lives or able to check our phones while hanging out. It was absolutely lovely, but the convenience of having a phone definitely outweighs not having one. Story 41. I believe people look foolish when they hold up their phones to record something and watch it through the screen. Many are preoccupied with taking selfies and videos instead of experiencing the moment. Story 42. It was absolutely hilarious to see someone walking around wearing a Bluetooth headset, especially if they were actually talking to someone. Nowadays, it is completely normal for someone to be talking to themselves because we assume they are wearing some kind of earbuds. Story 43. I assume you mean cell phones. If so, I actually miss the ability to be unreachable for a while. It used to be much harder to respond to the random questions that pop into my head at odd but constant intervals. Story 44. I assume you mean cell phones and not just the general concept of phones. Born in 1989, I got my first phone around 2005. My dad insisted I have one so he could call me after I received my driver's license the previous year and got my first job. I really didn't want the phone, a Motorola flip-on Singular, as I was uncomfortable with the idea of being contacted at any time and in any place. We didn't grow up with a lot of money, so for years my dad was the only person in the household with a cell phone, believing it was important for emergencies. Throughout that time, I've witnessed the rise and fall of many social media platforms, though they weren't primarily focused on phones. First, camera phones emerged, followed by Instagram, and that felt like a significant shift in society. While camera phones changed things, it was Instagram that seemed to fundamentally alter our collective psyche. Story 45. Phones were invented in the 19th century. The oldest person alive was born in 1908, so no one remembers how the world was without phones. There are still places without phone service. Story 46. If someone you know moved and you didn't get their new phone number or address, that person basically disappeared from your life unless you had mutual friends. I had friends in the 1980s with whom I lost contact until the internet became prevalent and they could search for me online. I would receive random phone calls from people I used to hang out with asking, "Hey, what have you been up to these last 20 years?" Story 47. People say it's the interest in social media, not the phones. To some degree, that's true, but phones are the delivery device for social media. They allow us to be constantly connected, always posting and uploading, always on, and never quite fully in the moment. Social media would not be what it is if people had to sit down at a desktop to access it, especially with a single computer shared by a household. It's similar to saying that vapes are not a problem. The nicotine extract is the problem. Sure, but the vape is the delivery device that makes it easy for nicotine to become a regular habit. Story 48. Moving into a new apartment and getting a phone plan with long-distance service was challenging, especially for a particularly irresponsible 20-something already overwhelmed with debt from music subscription services. Story 49. I want my old Nokia. I could have stopped there, but I didn't. Maybe we should start a back-to-mono-type movement. Story 50. We grew up during the Cold War when Russia was difficult to deal with. Nowadays, however, Russia still presents challenges. Story 51. It's overwhelming how much information is readily available that can lead to obsession or distraction. I miss the days of simply going somewhere and focusing on the task at hand, without interruptions from texts or calls from people upset that I haven't responded to their messages. What was originally intended as a safeguard for emergencies, like a car breaking down, has turned into a constant distraction and dependency. Story 52. Nothing is customized or personal now, so everything has returned to a static position that does not result in quality. People used to accept personal service and interruptions as a part of life, and they could engage in conversations with others while working without it being misused. People see things and believe that since they can see them, they are entitled to them. As a result, there is a cheaper version of everything. Overall quality has noticeably declined, including interactions. Think of pop music from the 1990s like the Goo Goo Dolls, Dave Matthews, and Alanis Morissette, compared to today's top 40, which is often bland and derivative of other genres. The same is true for movies. Story 53. Everyone spends most of their time staring at their phone now. Couples and friends know where each other are with almost pinpoint precision. You can reaffirm your beliefs and be in a community or echo chamber without ever having to speak to a real person. We are the most connected we have ever been, but also the most disconnected. Story 54. It's surprising that so many people here assume you mean mobile phones. That alone indicates a generational gap. Of course, they mean mobile phones, but for them, a phone has always been that. A phone nowadays is more like a device you always carry that you barely use for calling. It's odd that we still refer to it as a phone. It functions more like a pocket computer. In the past, A phone referred to a device mounted on a wall or a wireless unit that simply allowed communication. So, everyone assuming you mean mobile phones reflects an older perspective, much like mine. Story 55. It is simply an added convenience. Wikipedia amazes me more than cell phones do. Having enough mobile data for the digital nomad lifestyle at a reasonable price is a game changer that has emerged in recent years. Story 56. Before everyone had a personal computer, we relied more on personality and courage. If you wanted to say something unkind to someone's face, there was a possibility that you would receive a punch to the throat, so you had to consider that carefully. Story 57. Hot take. But I find people are overall smarter now. There was so much pervasive general ignorance in the broader public that we just don't see anymore. There is no secret society of devil worshippers kidnapping kids, and Pop Rocks plus soda won't explode your head if you swallow them incorrectly. Sure, there are pockets where some people can feed off and exacerbate certain conspiracies like the flat earth theory and the moon landing hoax, but the majority of people don't buy into these ideas and are much more skeptical these days. People are more careful with their words and, controversially, are less casually bigoted than we used to be, even in more conservative regions. Computers used to be a niche toy for enthusiasts. Those of us who were early adopters really lucked out on that timing. I still know some Generation X individuals who never really got into computers, and the world has somewhat left them behind. Finding friends who share a niche interest is now a whole new world. No matter what you're into, you can make friends who share that interest. Social media presents a whole new world of challenges and pitfalls, to be sure, and we need to be aware of that, but I think I would struggle in a world without the technology we have access to these days. Story 58. Life without phones or portable phones? Or were you referring to iPhones? Anyone who immigrated from a developing country more than 30 years ago probably remembers living without phones. Back then, urgent messages meant sending telegrams. Alternatively, you might have had an arrangement with someone who did have a phone, usually a local corner store, or a neighbor fortunate enough to get a phone after waiting a few years on a waiting list. You could give that number to close family who needed to reach you at a moment's notice. Story 59. I know many comments will focus on the negatives, but cell phones have been a blessing in many ways. It was daunting to have no way of contacting people during road trips. Maps on my phone have made navigating new places much easier, along with many other benefits compared to the past. Story 60. It's very different now. In the past, bullying happened in person. Now people do it online and can get away with it due to lax moderation and anonymous identities. Story 61. News used to be dull and primarily targeted at older audiences, and the state of the world seemed bleak. I recall being a teenager watching the Russian invasion of Georgia on television and thinking, well, anyway. Now, news resembles a tabloid focused more on selling articles and subscriptions than on meaningful reporting. They have tapped into people's minds, keeping them engaged with every moment of daily politics, delivered straight to their phones through push notifications, often while they are engaged in mindless scrolling. The world has always had its challenges. It's just more captivating than ever. Story 62. It's pretty crazy. I'm completely addicted. I expect to be buried with my phone because I doubt the Undertaker will be able to pry it from my cold, dead hands. Even I can't see this as a positive development at all. Story 63. Growing up, my friends would often just show up at the house. None of my children's friends have ever done that. Story 64. I was amazed when the telegraph was introduced, allowing me to send a message without hiring the Pony Express. It was astonishing then, and it remains astonishing now. Story 65. I remember a time before mobile phones became common and how life was full of mysteries. I didn't know all the intricacies of people's lives and romanticized everything. Now I know too much, and everyone seems disconnected. It's a hopeless feeling. Story 66. I'm bored with people assuming that because it's out there, I am part of it. They assume I have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and so on. They assume I follow what's trending or know what's going on. Ignorance is bliss. I don't care. I don't let things into my head. I believe people should be asking themselves what they want instead of just going along with society. It's crazy that people don't think for themselves. Yes, they think, but have they truly considered the impact being connected has on their decisions? Story 67. In my early 20s, I took a plane to another continent, and nobody knew where I was for months. Occasionally, I sent a postcard, but by the time it arrived, I was no longer there. My son is currently that age, and the blue dot indicates he's not yet back from the grocery store. Story 68. Life was freer then. You could leave work to do something and no one could find you. Bars were much busier on weekdays. The world will remain chaotic until people take responsibility for what they publish online. Right now, there are too many falsehoods and there are no consequences. Story 69. The world is definitely crazy. But I remember a time before phones when the news reported something you would believe it completely and then usually panic a bit. Imagine if every time there was a solar flare, a bird flu outbreak, or a random attack, you would have no idea what would really happen. There weren't numerous videos describing the exact news story and all the information behind it. You had the news story, and that was pretty much it unless you had strong research skills. Story 70. People talk about how we are always on our phones now and claim life was so much better. But I remember being extremely bored. I quit smoking when I had a phone, but it wasn't filled with applications. Waiting for a bus or whatever was terrible. Now I can distract myself. I never wanted to talk to most of the people who talked to me. Yes, people chatted more with strangers, but older generations speak of that like it was a good thing. It wasn't. I did chat, but only because I had no choice. Very little good came out of those conversations. More often than not, it was some inappropriate person hitting on me. And if you got lost and did not have a map, yes, you could ask for directions, but did that person know? Maybe yes, maybe no. And there were individuals who would intentionally direct you to the wrong place. I love being able to reach my child whenever I want. When she was first exploring on her own, she could call me and say she was lost. I could see her location on a map and guide her there. It was brilliant. I remember being scared and lost at 12 years old, too afraid to ask someone for help. I was vulnerable then in a way my daughter does not have to be. Anyway, I do think drivers are more distracted and we should not have screens visible to them. I like when people can focus on a conversation without checking their phones, but who were all these people talking to that they enjoyed? Not me. Having to rely on the poor memory of someone at a party or just looking something up, no thanks. Story 71. We usually visit each other's homes, knock on doors, chat, or go somewhere together. Now we just send memes and don't have real conversations unless we're in a group setting. Story 72. Phones were not made in the 1800s or something. I'm gonna guess you mean cell phones. Life was fine, but I was a kid. I don't think the world is that crazy. Crazy things have always been happening. Story 73. Before smartphones, I was a kid, and I had my Game Boy Advance. It was no different for me when it came to being glued to a device. Story 74. I remember calling a friend about 40 times in one day while he was on vacation when I was around 8 years old because I didn't know when he would get home. Story 75. I remember the days of no home phone, just a local call box that everyone used. You could even receive calls if you knew how. It's crazy looking back. Life has changed too fast for me. Even in school, you go through things gradually, but this was all just thrown in. Story 76. I was just a kid in the 1990s, and I remember seeing Raiders fans on the local news, thinking they were the scariest thing out there. Story 77. It's just the United States that's chaotic right now. Obviously, we have more advanced technology, but technological advancement has always occurred. To my first point, United States politics is incredibly chaotic at the moment. Never before in my life have I seen or heard of anything like this happening. Nearly every day, there's a new story about Donald Trump doing something unbelievable. Story 78. I still don't understand why people are so hooked on their phones and the allure of social media. Maybe I am wired differently? Story 79. It's just so fast. Too fast. It's crazy that people didn't have a means of communication on their person in the past for safety. Story 80. Assuming you mean cell phones. Honestly, I work in technology and I can say without a doubt that while it introduced some fantastic innovations, technology has negatively impacted kids. Not all, but a majority rarely go outside. Kids will never understand summers like I did. I remember growing up waking up early to catch my favorite cartoons with a self-made bowl of cereal. Then I would ride my bike to all my friends' houses to see who wanted to play. We would discover new places we had never dared to venture before, finding something new all the time. We would stop at random people's houses to drink from a water hose and then scrounge up what little money we had to get an icy treat to cool off in the shade. We always had that one friend we didn't really like who had either a big pool or an impressive gaming console and large TV. We tolerated them just long enough to get to play games after we couldn't take much more heat. When it got dark and the streetlights came on, we would pedal home in time to eat dinner and watch our favorite late-night shows. Story 81. It's frustrating. We could only use the internet on the desktop computer. As kids, we went outside and returned home for curfew. I can't imagine being a child in today's world. You're considered uncool if you don't have a phone, and if you do, you're navigating a risky environment. It's not that I want a world without phones. They are great for communication. I just wish we had never entered the smartphone era. Story 82. If you had told me 20 years ago that I would never leave the house without a phone in my pocket, I would have insisted you were crazy. Story 83. I used to leave the house with a clean handkerchief and 10 pence for an emergency telephone call home. The world is still recognizable. It's just in obvious trouble. Story 84. Unrecognizable. Social media has opened Pandora's box. So much brainwashing and negativity is being normalized. Story 85. I will say this. Social media is producing a new generation with different social skills that do not align with the current framework of society. However, technological advances have made life more convenient. I used to have to go to the bank during my lunch break to get cash, as cash was necessary for purchases. Banking technology is now incredibly convenient, which is hard to believe. This is just one example. Story 86. Kids who want to stay indoors and play video games or watch streaming platforms don't understand that I didn't get my first PlayStation 2 until I was 16. We had Oregon Trail and a Nintendo Entertainment System or Super Nintendo at Grandma's, but that was the only time we got to play. Story 87. The world has always been chaotic, but now we are hyper-aware of it. We are also constantly on social media and arguing, so everyone is in a perpetual state of agitation and ready to dispute over any little thing. I wish cordless phones and caller ID remained the pinnacle of telecommunications. Story 88. I believe the world would be much less stressful without smartphones. However, with smartphones, we are more aware of global events. It is both a blessing and a curse. Story 89. My car didn't have air conditioning, not because it didn't exist, but because we couldn't afford it. I remember VHS tapes. I remember people used to buy movies and spend a lot of time in record shops. We all used to play on the street because people were considerate or watch television or turn on the radio in the car, which sometimes worked. When the power went out, we lit candles and simply sat around them, either speaking softly or running like headless chickens in the dark. I liked it. It felt like a much-needed break. We didn't have air conditioning at home, and it used to be a sweat fest during the summer, but it was fun. Everything felt real. Not once did we escape reality, nor did we ever want to. It was nice the way it was. When people wanted to be with you, they truly wanted to be with you because they had to put in the effort to be there. Story 90. I was always so bored before phones and internet access. I dreamed of something compact, portable, and endlessly entertaining. Now that smartphones are everywhere, I feel like I haven't accomplished anything at the end of the day, but I wasn't as bored. I constantly forget that I have the knowledge of the world in the palm of my hand because I'm distracted by interesting facts online. Now, I'm wondering if you meant actual telephones. Oh well, whatever. The world is pretty crazy with a narcissistic person in the White House. Story 91. I remember it being calmer, with less noise, connectivity, and confusion. That said, I was a child for most of it. It might have been different for adults. Story 92. The world might have been just as crazy as it is now, but I don't recall knowing the details of its craziness every day. I learned from my parents, newspapers, legacy news, and perhaps college about alternative media. Because of that, I think we focused on our immediate world: family, work, school, and friends. I only understood the craziness in hindsight. I understand where the anxiety comes from today. Story 93. Simple things like getting information were done differently. I was born in 1982 and grew up with beepers, bag phones, and then cell phones. We didn't have cable, so you had to watch the news for the weather. If you missed the news, you just didn't know the weather for the day. We got our weather forecast by calling a phone number owned by a local bank, which was a recording updated each day. However, if someone else was calling at the same time, the line would be busy, and you would have to call back. Similarly, if you wanted to know movie showtimes at the theater, you either had to subscribe to the local newspaper, which listed showtimes, or you could call the theater and listen to a list of all the movies and their times. If you zoned out and missed what you were listening for, you had to hang up and call back. And you better hope no one else is trying to call at the same time, or the line would be busy, and you would have to keep trying to reach them. Story 94. People usually focus on external activities, such as children playing outdoors with friends or participating in sports. However, what many overlook is how phones impact family relationships. Children and teenagers seek connection constantly, but smartphones make it easy to get lost in their own digital worlds. Whether it's a child watching Bluey, a preteen watching meme videos, or a teenager following their favorite streamer, none of these experiences foster meaningful interaction. When I was a child, my primary interactions were with my family. Once I turned 15 and gained internet access, online multiplayer games changed my experiences significantly. I can clearly remember the difference before and after that shift. Story 95. I had to wait until after hours to make a long-distance call to the nearest large city. The cost difference was incredible. We also had prepaid calling cards at one point. Story 96. Phones refer to cellular telephones and landline telephones. For example, this includes individuals living in rural areas without access to landline services. Story 97. I want to go back so badly. I'm addicted to my phone, whether it's Instagram, Facebook Marketplace, Reddit, or ChatGPT. I'm always on this device. I dislike people having instant access to me. And if someone doesn't reply immediately, I wonder, are they upset with me? Or the other way around? I despise phones. Story 98. Without phones? I remember back in 1875, before Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, we had to walk to someone's house to tell them something. Story 99. People do not trust those they know as much as they trust strangers. I have observed more issues related to suspicion or jealousy over text messages than ever before mobile phones. Meanwhile, random influencers with clear agendas and no credible sources are treated as truth-tellers. I find this quite depressing. Sitting down for a meal with someone while their phone is out on the table for constant checking is very annoying. Story 100. I remember when you had to go somewhere and wait to see if someone showed up. If they didn't, you just had to go on with your day. You couldn't text, email, or call them. Story 101. I am astounded by how gullible the average person is. I do not believe people have become more gullible, but the average person is lied to much more frequently now. Critical thinking skills have not increased, but the sheer amount of information, whether true or not, has. Story 102. We weren't connected all the time. Solitude was meaningful. You could sit and listen to your thoughts. Phone calls were an event. Story 103. We would show up at each other's houses and knock on the door to see if they were home. Can Billy come out to play? The idea of showing up at someone's door now seems unusual. It's not something we do in the age of mobile phones and texting. Story 104. Before phones, people kept stacks of magazines in the bathroom as reading material. You would even see specially made magazine holders for this purpose. Story 105. Personally, I love it. I had a long drive home at midnight on the weekend, so I called my daughter in Italy and chatted with her for 45 minutes. She had just gotten home, so it was easy. When I am at work and start thinking about my wife or feeling a bit lonely, I can call her and chat for a few minutes. If I don't want to talk to anyone or be interrupted, I put my phone on silent and return the calls later. Additionally, I have been pursuing a Master of Business Administration in marketing for the last decade through free podcasts while working. Learning so much while doing simple tasks is another benefit of my smartphone. Story 106. Assuming you mean smartphones before they became the norm, they were largely the same. Just contacting people took a bit longer as we had to leave messages, etc. Story 107. Not being connected all the time was what prompted us to leave the house and remember to call someone when we got home, along with knowing their number. Before I started using my phone for payment, I would often go out to dinner or a barbecue without it, and people would react as if I had slapped them. Even now, I have no notifications on, and the ringer is set to silent. Emails and similar messages are not urgent, and the phone vibrates when someone calls. Story 108. My mother remembers a time before phones in homes. There was one on the street that many families shared when she was young, then a party line, and later a regular phone in the early 1960s. I suppose they just got along without them. Story 109. It is alarming how quickly we have lost privacy. Everything you say and do is being recorded. 20 years ago, you could have a private conversation. Now, every action is being monitored. Story 110. It's funny how, despite these devices, people believe the world is more dangerous than ever. Not long ago, a person could get lost or disappear. Now, you're being tracked at all times, yet people are afraid of threats lurking outside. Story 111. Social media has become a significant negative force. In the past, people could meet and form friendships without being aware of each other's political viewpoints. Now, it's common to remain connected with acquaintances from many years ago on platforms like Facebook. Previously, friends could engage in lighthearted conversations without the fear of their actions being recorded and shared with everyone. The ability of harmful individuals, such as extremists, to connect and discuss increasing their influence is troubling. Cyberbullying poses a serious issue for teenagers. The tendency for people to change their profile pictures, post memes, and label that as activism is also concerning. Overall, while I believe phones and the internet have great potential, social media is having a detrimental impact on our world. Story 112. I used to retain information in my brain, which I would then recall or synthesize with other information as needed. Now I just let my phone handle all of that. Story 113. Friends would meet at places at a specific time and wait, hope, and trust that the person would actually show up on time at the meeting place. Story 114. Not that crazy. I saw two separate photos taken on the New York subway about 60 years apart. In the most recent photo, every person on the subway platform had their head down looking at their phones. In the much older photo, every person on the subway platform had their head down reading a newspaper. Story 115. It is just as crazy as it was before, but now everyone has a camera in their pocket and access to all the information they could ever want, making it seem even crazier. Story 116. It's mostly that people have less patience nowadays. They can't wait for anything. Some even pay to speed things up, like in games. Story 117. It is incredible to have knowledge available at your fingertips anytime, anywhere. I remember my father always telling me to find answers at the library or look up words in a dictionary. If you needed to know something, it was a process. Story 118. Not that different, really. We had music, radios, and record players. When we needed information, we could go to the library. We had television, and there were some good shows. Of course, having all this in the palm of my hand is a change. The funny thing is that what I thought the internet would be, a cool place for people to connect, is now more like television and radio used to be with all those predictable advertisements. Story 119. I used to trust my friends to meet up at a certain time, and they would actually show up. It's difficult to have that level of trust anymore since people are often unreliable now. Story 120. I was more creative and often confidently incorrect, as there was no way to fact-check myself without driving to an open library and getting a book on the topic. Story 121. These phones are no longer phones. They function like remote controls. In the past, people used to be together, engage in conversation, and spend quality time with their families. All of that is gone. Story 122. We will message each other asking to come online to Microsoft Skype so we can chat there. Even though we are online, we can always disconnect. Story 123. It's great. My resume highlights that I am not a phone addict and have a strong tendency to work while at my job. Story 124. I doubt many people who remember life without phones are on Reddit. In Western countries, houses had telephones in the 1940s, even if they were just party lines. Story 125. People don't understand how much GPS on a phone has changed how we travel. Before, you needed to know exactly where you were going, have a map, or drive around to ask random people for directions. Now, I can enter addresses and get directions for a car, bike, public transportation, and more, along with time estimates and alternate routes. Story 126. Finding music was challenging. I would be in the city or at a mall and see some cool older kids. I bought albums based on the bands from their shirts. I even bought a Sex Pistols album because their name was spray painted on an overpass near my house, and I saw it all the time since I was about 4 years old. It was the same with films and books as well. Everything felt so unique back then. It made meeting other people much more rewarding. You would meet a kid from another school, and they would introduce you to a variety of new bands or films that no one you knew had experienced. Story 127. The barriers to entry for any business or creative pursuit are virtually non-existent. The capabilities I have from my living room chair are absolutely stunning. Story 128. Insane. But I'm sure those who rode horses thought the same of motor coaches. Those of us who grew up before cell phones understand how reluctant our parents were to change anything. Grandparents were even worse. Why do you need a remote for the television? Just get up and change the channel. There are too many channels. All you need are the big three and PBS. In all seriousness, I never expected the significant shift taking place in the United States right now. Even when I was at my most pessimistic, I still didn't think it would be this bad in my lifetime. Story 129. The first cell phone I saw was the old brick phone used by Zach Morris. My parents got one for their business when I was about 16. I never owned one until after college and my first job. Life was better. Story 130. Another economic crisis. They come and go. If it becomes like the Great Depression, there are not too many of those individuals left anymore. Story 131. Meaning mobile phones? I'm assuming? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 10. Life was so relaxed in the 1980s and 1990s compared to this nightmare. I literally put my phone in other rooms and ignore it for hours. It's liberating. Story 132. I don't think anyone born before Alexander Graham Bell is alive today and answering questions on Reddit. Story 133. People used to seem much more friendly and sociable. I believe that phones have replaced much of that with anxiety. Story 134. People are addicted to devices that track their every move and listen to everything they say, but they don't seem to care. Continuous surveillance is now the norm. People are actually becoming less intelligent, and I believe this has a lot to do with it. Story 135. I'm 40, and it's amazing to think that in my lifetime we went from no internet or mobile phones to where we are now. I remember the dial-up tone for the internet, my first mobile phone, which was a Nokia, and how it was such an incredible new thing. I recall my first touchscreen phone with no buttons, my first digital camera, laptop, and tablet. The surprising how far technology has come. Even televisions are completely different now. Story 136. Still a capitalist society that wages wars for profit, undermines the working class, and divides it with a culture war imposed through privately owned media and state institutions that defend the interests of a dominant social class, resulting in an upward transfer of wealth. Society at its core is the same as it was before. Story 137. My country was struggling with mismanagement, widespread corruption, and blatant tax avoidance by the elite, while the middle class faced significant challenges. It was nearly a theocratic state with 50,000 children emigrating each year. A 20-year civil war was ongoing in the sectarian region in the north of my island. Trust me, even with phones, it is much less chaotic now. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.